On this Jamesthebikeguy, we're going to talk about how to fix mountain bikes that sound like this. And this. Yeah, and that too. Whew. Rock gardens galore. So stick with me so I can show you how to overhaul the suspension on your full suspension mountain bike and make it silent so you don't have to hang your head in shame and walk out of the trail after the cool kids make fun of you for your noisy ass bike. Sorry guys. Well, join me and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so that way you can see more tutorials like this into the future. To help this video make a bit of sense, we're going to go ahead and start with checking out how to diagnose where the creak is coming from. Then we're going to move on to the removal and replacement of the suspension pivot bolts. And then finally, we're going to test out that the suspension no longer makes noise. So let's go ahead and start out with finding out where the heck this creak is coming from. In this case, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do a test using the crank and the pedals here. So basically what I want to do is I want to put my foot onto the pedal, give a quick press into the frame, and see if we can make it creak. So take a listen. So what we just learned there is that the creaking happened as I was pressing into the crank, but it actually got quieter the more times that I pressed down onto the crank. So that's leading me to believe that it's likely something with the suspension settling as I press into it. To test that theory, what we'll go ahead and do is just the same thing on the other side. So I'll move that crank down and let's press into it. Yep, and that made some noise there. The next step that we want to do is the good old-fashioned seat post test, because the seat and saddle and post can all make noise. So I'm pressing down with the back of my forearm right on the back of the seat, pulling up on the saddle, and you'll notice it is perfectly quiet. So what that's going to lead me to believe is that it's not the seat or the seat post into the frame that are making the noise, because rocking those isn't changing anything. So that brings us to our last test before we start taking this apart, which is going to be basically grabbing the tire and the saddle. And what I want to do is kind of push them in opposite directions. The reason for this is that's going to help eliminate the possibility that the creaking we were hearing earlier was coming from the crank in the bottom bracket, but rather something with the suspension here. So let's go ahead and give that a shot. So that has a ton of noise. So by performing that last test, that's going to help verify to me that it's very unlikely it's coming from the crankset and more likely it's coming from the suspension. And the reason is we've tested that when you press on the crank, it makes noise, but then again, you're laterally moving the frame. The next thing we did is we tested the seat and seat post by putting that torquing force on the seat post, and that didn't make noise. So we know it has to be coming from the rear end of the bike. So the last thing that we tested was the manual test with the hand on the saddle and the wheel, and that creaking noise that's coming from the bike when I do that, that verifies to me that it has to be somewhere in the linkage. Well, the good news is linkage doing greasing is super easy, and we'll get this thing silent. So let's hit the stand and check it out. To accomplish this task, you're going to need a bike stand or a place to flip your bike over, a flat surface to work on, a pretty standard toolkit with Allen keys and wrenches for whatever your suspension needs, some Pedro's bike cleaner, because if we're taking it apart, we might as well clean it, some grease, your favorite, some Loctite 248, a torque wrench, because we don't want to break nothing, hydration of your favorite kind, and well, tunes, because what else are you going to jam out to? Now, depending on the type of suspension your bike has, the pivots and the design may look a little bit different. But in a whole, this is pretty much the process that you're going to do for just about any bike. What we're going to start off by doing is we're going to start one by one, taking each of the bolts out, pulling them out, re-greasing, putting some Loctite on them, and then sending them back in. And one thing to mention is you want to make sure that you have the torque spec for your suspension setup before you start taking the stuff apart. On most modern bikes or better quality bikes, you'll notice that they'll have the torque spec written on the outside. So just make sure that you have a compatible torque wrench so that you can set this back up properly. This is incredibly important. So we'll go ahead and get started. I'm going to start with the rocker link. It's a nice and simple place to begin. And when taking apart these bolts, you want to make sure that you do so in a way that you can pull them out cleanly and stuff doesn't get lost. And what you'll notice here is this bolt is totally dry from the factory. It does have some Loctite to it, but that's going to be really easy for this to start making some creaking noise because of course it's dry on dry. So on your worktop, go ahead and take your little pivot there. We're going to add just a little bit of grease. We're going to slide that right around the pivot. We don't want to do quite too much, but we'll get some grease on the bolt here. While we're at it, I'm just going to grease around the pivot, or excuse me, the minnow link on my bike. Your bike may or may not have that. But what you're not going to be doing is you don't want to be greasing the threads. So instead, we'll grease that stuff. Then we'll take our Loctite 248, and I like it in stick form like this because then you can just rotate the Loctite right on. So we got just a little bit on there, and now this is a freshly prepped bolt to be able to put right back on. So with that prepped bolt, I'm going to go ahead, put the minnow link in the back there, and then slide our new greased link right back in, and righty-tighty until it gets snug, just like that. We don't want to tighten down. Now this is telling us that it needs a torque of 17 Newton meters, so we'll go ahead, bring this up to 17, just like that. And then from here, just go ahead and tighten down. There we go. Now we've tightened that in, and our pivot's back in place. Time to do it on the rest of them. The other side should come out too. So if we press that through, that'll pop right out. And now we've got the nut and the through bolt. So we'll go ahead and take our through bolt here, grease this guy up nice and good. Then take our rag, make sure that lubricant is all over the place. So we've got the lube on our bolt, and go ahead, slide that right back together just like that. Put our nut on the other side, and just righty-tighty. There we are. No, guys, we're not done yet. Even though we did all the pivots in the front end, don't forget about the dropouts. This is a well-known area to get some creaking, so let's pull these guys apart. In this case, the Trek has a concentric bearing around the axle, so the dropout is also a pivot, so it makes for an interesting location to get some noise as well. So go ahead and pull this out. It's going to come out just like that. And then we're actually going to want to push from the inside. And what you'll see is the dropout comes in two pieces. So let's get these greased up. Take this opportunity, grease a little in here too while I'm at it. Get that done. So these two slide right back into place. And this is only getting torqued up to 15 Newton meters. There we are. Finally, we've got our last pivot here, which also happens to be the mount for the derailleur. On your bike, the derailleur hanger can be a spot of noise too, so don't be too scared to take this off. And at the same time, we're going to grease up the mount for the derailleur. So that pulls apart, and just as before, no grease, so that's going to be a big help. But very interesting is these dropouts on the Trek fuels, the new 2020s and 2021s. This is actually nylon, it's not even metal. Kind of funny, isn't it? Now we'll go ahead and take our derailleur, wipe off its threads, get an ever so slight dab of grease on that. Get that tightened up. Now before I go ahead and put the rear wheel back in, just going to go ahead, spray it down with some Pedro's Green Fizz. And the reason for this is I want to be able to make sure everything's nice and clean, take off any of that extra grease that is left on there. I mean, we went pretty liberal with the grease, so go ahead and wipe down your bike nice and good. The extra grease challenge is it can attract dirt, so we don't want that hanging around on the bike. So just quick wipe down here. Got the bike all cleaned up, and out of nowhere it got pretty dark, but go ahead and put some lube on that through axle before you throw it back in, and let's put the wheel in there. And now it's time for the truth. Does it still creak? Let's pull this guy down. Wish me luck here, guys. Yeah, silent. Look at that. So we'll press right on. Nice and quiet. Let's go ahead and check the other side just to be 100% sure, but we'll drop that on. And then our perfect. Well, we did it. A little bit of grease and a bike stand. We got this thing back together and totally silent. And man, it just feels great. Well, I really hope you learned something today. I hope you got the chance to understand that it's not too scary to take your suspension apart. You can make a huge difference in how the bike sounds and just your overall comfort when you're out on the ride, because you're not hearing this thing creak around sounding like something's gonna break. All pretty simple right at home. So guys, let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. What techniques or tips could I learn from the way I did it? Did you learn anything while watching this? While you're at it, be sure to hit that thumbs up button. It inflates my ego and lets me know that you enjoyed the video, as well as go ahead and hit that subscribe button so you can see more videos about parts, gear, bike rides, and of course, how to fix your own bike. Bye.